This video was brought to you by Ground News. On Tuesday, the UK suddenly announced that they concluded a trade deal with India, just days before it's due to sign another deal with the US, and only a fortnight or so before another with the EU. The government has claimed that this deal was a huge economic win, but this was all quickly overshadowed by a furious reaction from the opposition over a provision in the deal that would allow Indian employees to work in the UK without paying national insurance. So in this video, we're going to explain the new UK-India trade deal and why it's already proving controversial. If you're interested in the political alliances and groupings that shape our world, then you might enjoy our poster, Every Alliance Explained. It shows, in slightly confusing detail, all of the world's major alliances and how different countries link together. Check out the poster by clicking the links in the description. So, let's start with a bit of context. Trade negotiations between the UK and India originally kicked off back in May 2021, under then Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and only a couple of months after the UK left the EU. This was all part of Johnson's Global Britain vision for the UK post-Brexit, which mainly involved signing bilateral trade deals with the UK's trading partners. The government at the time insisted that these deals wouldn't have been possible inside the EU, and therefore proved the economic merits of leaving. At the time, the government also argued that this would help the UK's so-called tilt to the Indo-Pacific, which was a policy that the Boris Johnson administration basically copied and pasted from Obama, who started talking about an American pivot to the Indo-Pacific back in 2011. The rationale behind this so-called tilt was that the Indo-Pacific region includes many of the world's fastest growing economies, and that the UK could therefore benefit by leveraging its pre-existing cultural ties with countries like India, Australia, and New Zealand, in order to craft a deeper trading relationship with the region. This would also help to strengthen ties with the US, which has been trying for the past couple of years to refocus its attention away from Europe and towards Asia, largely in reaction to the rise of China. In the original strategy paper published by the government after the UK and India agreed to open negotiations, the government also argued that doing a deal with India would, quote, cement the UK's position as a leader among a network of countries committed to free trade, while strengthening like-minded democracies who are committed to ensuring mutual prosperity. Anyway, negotiations trickled along for the next couple of years, but a deal didn't look immediately forthcoming until Trump started whacking tariffs on all of America's trading partners after Liberation Day. Trump's tariffs created new incentives to get a deal done fast, to both offset any Trump-related disruption to trade and reiterate British and Indian support for the very idea of free trade, which was under threat not just from Trump, but also from other developed countries who are increasingly interested in protectionist policies, justified under the euphemism of industrial policy. Anyway, spurred on by Trump's tariffs, for the past couple of weeks, the two sides have been hashing out the final details, and on Tuesday, the UK announced that a deal had been concluded. So, what's actually in the deal? Well, the actual text is yet to be published, so we're going off recent statements by Indian and British officials. Nonetheless, the outlines of this trade deal have been apparent for quite some time now. India generally has far higher tariffs than the UK, which has meant the deal was always going to involve India lowering its tariff rates in return for some sort of non-tariff concessions from the UK. For context, according to WTO data for 2023, India currently has a trade-weighted average tariff rate of 12%, with tariffs above 100% on lots of agricultural goods, and around 30% for most manufactured products. This is far higher than not only the UK, which has a trade-weighted average tariff rate of just 3.3%, but also similar economies like China, Mexico, and Brazil. As such, these tariffs cover the vast majority of British exports. In 2019, for instance, the UK exported £5.35 billion worth of goods to India, of which £5.24 billion was subject to some level of tariff. As part of this new deal, however, India has agreed to reduce about 90% of these tariffs, with 85% going to zero over the next 10 years. And the UK government is particularly proud of the coming reductions in whiskey and gin tariffs, which are due to ultimately fall from 150% to 40%, as well as reductions in automotive tariffs, which are due to fall from 100% to 10%, albeit with a quota. There will also be a steep reduction in agricultural tariffs, which could provide a new and growing market for British agricultural exports without undercutting British producers, which was one of the big issues with both Australia and New Zealand's trade deals. Nonetheless, while this might be good news for certain sectors, the UK just doesn't do that much trade with India. Bilateral trade amounted to about £40 billion last year, or about 2% of the UK total, and the aggregate impact will be pretty meagre. The government expects bilateral trade to increase by £25 billion a year, which will boost the UK's GDP by about 0.1% a year. It's also worth saying that the two sides failed to agree a bilateral investment treaty, which could have generated a more dramatic boost to GDP by helping British service exporters like banks and law firms access the Indian market. All in all, while there could be some more substantial gains in the longer term, especially if India continues on a high growth trajectory, in the short term, this deal probably won't do that much. Furthermore, the concessions that the UK government made in order to get the deal over the line have sparked some controversy. As well as reducing some of its own tariffs, the UK has apparently agreed to let Indian employees working in the UK on short-term visas only make social security payments to the Indian state, and therefore avoid paying national insurance in the UK, at least for the first 3 years. Now, this agreement is reciprocal, which means that UK employees temporarily working in India will only pay national insurance in the UK, although it is worth mentioning that there are far fewer British professionals working in India than vice versa, with Indian-owned businesses employing about 100,000 people throughout the UK. Now, this has provoked uproar from the opposition parties, who argue that Indian employees will be able to undercut British workers, because not having to pay national insurance, which the UK government recently increased, means they'll be cheaper to employ. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch accused Starmer of accepting two-tier taxes. Lib Dem Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper said that the exemption risked undercutting British workers, and Reform leader Nigel Farage claimed that the deal showed that the government doesn't give a damn about working people. Now, the government has defended this provision by noting that the UK has similar agreements with more than 50 other countries, including the EU and US, which are intended, reasonably, to prevent double contributions by seconded employees. Nonetheless, it does look like whatever benefits this deal might bring have been overshadowed by this provision, and Labour should be very wary of similar dynamics playing out when they announce deals with the US and EU later this month. Regardless of all of that, all of these trade deals are complex and nuanced stories of their own. And as such, there's plenty more you can read about them online. The problem is, how can you make sure that what you're reading isn't hugely biased? Well, that's a problem that we face when we're making these videos too. And luckily, that's where this week's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. For this story in particular, they've identified that there are at least 30 left-leaning and 39 right-leaning sources reporting on it. And in addition to this, they've also shown the main differences in the headlines between the left and right-leaning outlets, with left-leaning coverage generally being more optimistic and right-leaning coverage generally being more negative, especially of the controversial national insurance exemption. We're able to do that because of our sponsor, Ground News, whose incredible website and app lets you discover the news and pulls back the curtain on media bias. That's because every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. But one of the best parts of the app is their blind spot feed. It presents you with stories and articles that haven't been reported on by one side of the aisle or the other, helping you better break out of your media bubble and discover what those on the other side of the political spectrum are really saying. This is all in addition to the bias distribution we mentioned earlier. And together, these fantastic features help you to figure out exactly who's behind the stories you're reading and what agenda they might have. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I think that an app like this will only become more essential as the media landscape continues to evolve. So if you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan by using the link in the description, or by scanning the QR code on screen. And this offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.